All right. Well, let's go ahead now and we'll dig into the persecution of the early church. So, as I said, persecution is probably one of the defining factors of the early church. When you're talking about the early church, often what occurs occurs within the context of persecution. And it's really astounding that the church was able to grow and flourish in and through that. Famously, Tertullian, who we'll talk about a little bit later, said that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And we'll see that persecution, and that God used the persecution of the early church to help it to grow and to be established in its young years. So Jesus told his disciples in John 15, "If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you." The early church was a persecuted church. As we look at the history, first we see this clearly, that the church faced persecution by Jewish leaders. We see this throughout the New Testament. We see this in the Gospels, with the ministry of Jesus. We see this in Acts, as Peter and Paul are ministering and spreading the gospel. And we see this into the period of what we call the early church. Many Jews thought that Jesus was lying about being the Son of God. They also thought that the idea of God dying upon a Roman cross was outrageous and offensive. And this is why Paul says the cross is a stumbling block to Jews. Jesus was not the Messiah that they had been expecting. They wanted one who would deliver them from the Romans. This was the common idea of the day, right? You see this in Peter often. You see this in Judas as well. They thought the Messiah was going to come to redeem them from oppression. They thought he was going to come and conquer the Romans. We see first the church faced persecution by Jews. Next, the church faced persecution from the Roman Empire. And that persecution continued with interruptions for nearly 300 years. And I think when we can throw out that number, 300 years of persecution, and when you really begin to think about it, right, the United States has only really been around for 300 years. Generations upon generations of early Christians faced this persecution. So, since the 5th century, it has been customary, thanks to St. Augustine, to number 10 great persecutions that the church faced. Okay, we're not going to talk about all 10. That's just too much. Be rather probably morbid. So Augustine traces these 10. So I'll list them for you. The 5th century. So this is from Augustine in the City of God. This is one of the things he lays out in the City of God is these 10, what he says, 10 great persecutions that the church faced. In good early church fashion, he says, well, these 10 persecutions are like the 10 plagues of Egypt. I don't know much about that, but so he says, and this is what we see. So we have persecution under Nero, Domitian, Trajan. You don't need to know all these. I mean, you can write them down if you want, but under Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic, Septimus Severus, Maximinus, Decius, Valerian, Aurelian, and Diocletian. So those are the 10 great persecutions that the church faced under these 10 emperors. It would be a mistake to understand that each of these persecutions are equal in size and in scope, right? Only two were imperial-wide persecutions, meaning, right, only two of these persecutions extended the entirety of the empire. A lot of Christians faced local persecution with local governors. So those two that extended over the empire were of Decius. You'll need to know these ones. Decius, and Diocletian. So those are empire-wide. So we have two great empire-wide persecutions, but Christianity was always illegal. From Trajan to Constantine. So Trajan is, you can give him kind of rough date of 100. So from 100 to so rough dates, 100 to 300. Christianity is illegal. But Christians weren't always treated the same. Some it was from annoyance to violence and martyrdom. So what I want to do is I want to trace three of these persecutions, which will kind of give you an understanding of what the church faced as it struggled with the Roman Empire. Okay, we'll take 10 and I'll give you three in some more detail here. And then what I want to do is we're going to kind of look at what the results of those persecutions were in the church. And then I want to just briefly sketch a few martyrs, lives of a few martyrs and their deaths. And then we're going to read Tertullian to the martyrs. So the first persecution took place in the 10th year of Nero's reign. First persecution took place in the 10th year of Nero's reign. Okay, this is 64 AD. 64 AD. All right, this connects us with the book of Acts. So interestingly, this persecution was not a religious persecution. You may be familiar with the story, but the first persecution from the Romans towards Christians originated in a public calamity, which was charged upon the innocent Christians. So this is the fire in Rome. This was just a local persecution that did not expand past Rome, the city. Rome was, we often think of Rome as a city full of marble and stone, and it was, but most of the city was wood. And a fire broke out probably in a baker's shop. And that fire spread to destroy, from what I've read, about 70% of the city. Nero was, not well loved at that point. He was initially actually a very moral emperor, and he had some I don't know exactly what happened. Some people think he went insane, but he began to kill off a number of those in his council, killed his own mother, and was just cruel and vicious to his own people. And at this point, Nero, being not well liked, needed to find a scapegoat. And so he blamed the Christians.
Did he start that fire?
No, I think it was an accident, and the people came to him. Why is this happening? Why aren't you doing anything about this? Because he really wasn't doing anything. And so then he turned the attention to the Christians. There are a number of writings. Eusebius talks about the persecutions that occurred subsequently to this great fire. Nero was said to have dipped Christians in oil and light them on fire to light his parties. And it was really a period of rage against the church that led to Jewish revolt in large part. So if you're familiar a little bit with the period, there was really constant tension between the Jews and the Romans. That tension broke with the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Nero's persecution, I think, helped to lead into the break of that tension. And then what you have is the separation of Christianity from Judaism. One of Nero's gripes with the Christians was that while they would not, they didn't worship in normal ways. And so one of the rumors that he spread as this persecution was going on was that the Christians were cannibals. As the Lord's Supper was taken in the early church, what happened often was that the congregation would come together, and anyone who was not a member of the church, who had not clearly confessed the faith, was asked to leave. So the Romans said, well, that's kind of weird. Usually everybody comes to the feast, right, of the gods. And right, the Christians barring unbelievers from entry and claiming, right, to eat the bread and drink the wine, right, which is symbolic of the body and blood of Christ. Well, the Romans labeled them as cannibals. After the persecution of Nero, this kind of stint of rage after the Great Fire, and during the rapidly succeeding reigns of the next 5 emperors, the church faced virtually no serious persecution. So there was a break. So after Nero, you have Nero commits suicide, and then Nero's sons come in, and that does not go well. And so 5 emperors later, we have the next persecution. Okay, this next persecution comes under Domitian. So he ruled from 81 to 96. Domitian is described by all accounts as a suspicious and blasphemous tyrant. He treated the embracing of Christianity as a crime against the state. And he condemned to death many Christians, including his own cousin. It was during Domitian's reign that Christians began to be labeled as atheists. And you're thinking, huh? Atheists? Well, Christians didn't believe in the Roman pantheon of gods. They only believed in one God. So because they didn't believe in the gods, they were labeled atheists. And this further, we'll see, connect to later persecutions. But even still, this persecution under Domitian was rather tame when compared with the others. Okay, third is under Trajan. Trajan. So this persecution took place from 98 to 117 under his reign. So Trajan made Christianity officially illegal. Yet, he was both cruel and lenient towards Christians. He forbade the search for Christians, yet he commanded their punishment if they were caught. If someone claimed to be a Christian at one point and then denied any affiliation with the church at another point, he was lenient. So during this period, the church is often unsure of how the government is going to respond to them. They might respond with fine. They might respond with martyrdom, right? There might be slight oppression, or there might be the result of death. Yet through this period, the church continued to grow. So the emperor-wide persecution, as I said, began under Decius. So in 249, so it began in 249. This is where we see very systematic, clear persecution against the church. So Decius demanded that everyone participate in sacrifices to the gods. And this sacrifice looked like taking a pinch of incense and putting it into fire before a Roman proconsul. Those who obeyed would receive a certificate, which was called the libellus. Libellus. The certificate said, hey, so-and-so offered sacrifice to the gods, right? And stamped by the Roman authorities. Those who were found without a libellus were imprisoned, tortured, and often killed. Christians did not sacrifice to the gods. And so many Christians faced this persecution. This persecution faced a far greater number of martyrs than any former persecution put together. Once again, this label stuck that Christians were atheists. They didn't sacrifice to the gods. They didn't believe in the gods. And in the Roman world, that was they didn't really care if you believed in the gods. They just wanted you to say that you did. Right? So it's a political tactic. It's a way to seek to unify the people.
What
Mhm.
was that about? It was more, it killed more Christians than
Than any of the previous persecutions
even
put together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the first few. So you have persecution of Christians here, but it's not necessarily direct. It's kind of indirect, right? It's Christians would not submit to a particular law put in place by the Romans. Under Diocletian, then you have direct persecution of Christians in 303. It starts in 303. So Diocletian ordered the destruction of all churches, places of worship for the Christians. He ordered the confiscation of Christian books, and he dismissed Christians from any form of government or the army, and he imprisoned pastors. I think I said I was going to give you 3. I gave you 5. A few extra there. Through the period of the early church, Christians refused to worship other gods. And so they became what we call today martyrs. Martyr comes from the Greek. Martyr means witness. Christian devotion and courage under persecution and death worked to strengthen the faithful and to draw others into the church. Those who died for their faith were witnesses of the truth of the gospel, of the truth that life with Christ is greater than life on earth. That heaven is worth more than all the things that this earth might bring. So, well, what was the result of this? The church did not wither, did not die. No, Philip Schaff has summarized well. The long and bloody war of heathen Rome against the church, which is built upon the rock, utterly failed. It began in Rome under Nero, and it ended near Rome at the Milvian Bridge under Constantine. So Constantine came to power in 312 at the battle called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. During this period, as you can tell, right, it's emperors don't last very long, and so often, throughout the Roman period, emperors were made emperors because they defeated the other interested parties to be emperor. Right? As generals that became emperors because they had the strongest army and the greatest number of followers and the most influence. And so Constantine, under the providence of God, of course, right, became emperor in 312 after defeating a rival at Milvian Bridge. I'm sure you're familiar with the story. Again, this is something that he has, we have from his own words, but that he recounts as seeing a vision of Christ and being told that to conquer, he should place the cross upon the shield of his men. That the cross was that which would conquer. That he would conquer under the sun. And so that he did, and he then became emperor. Won the battle and became emperor. Well, as a result of this, I do think Constantine had a genuine faith. He issued what's known as the Edict of Milan in 313. This edict then formally and finally gave toleration to the Christian faith. It was no longer illegal now to be Christian. What a lot of people get wrong is a lot of people say, well, Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome, and if you weren't a Christian, right, then you were oppressed or whatever. No, that's not the case. He merely gave toleration to Christianity, to the faith. That didn't happen until later in 381 with Theodosius. So, yeah. Theodosius? 381. Yeah. So, where Rome sought to defeat the church, it failed. Aiming to exterminate, it purified. It called forth the virtues of Christian heroism and resulted in the consolidation and triumph of the new religion. We'll read more from Tertullian, right? But we see, as I mentioned before, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Right? By that he means the church grew, right? It was watered. The church, as a seed, was watered by the blood of the martyrs and grew up as a result. So aiming to exterminate, Rome purified the church, expanded it, extended it, and worked to establish it. So I wanted to just mention to you a few martyrs who are often talked about. There are numerous martyrs, right, whose names are never known, yet who were faithful as witnesses in life and in death for the gospel and to life in Christ. But I want to mention four who are often discussed. So the first is Ignatius. So as I mentioned, we know virtually nothing about Ignatius in his life until he was condemned to death. As a bishop, a pastor in the early church from Antioch, he was condemned because he refused to sacrifice to the gods. He was condemned in Antioch and was sent to Rome. We know about, we remember him in large part because of the letters that he sent while traveling from Antioch to his death in Rome. He sent a series of 7 letters to churches, which you can read if you're so interested, encouraging them to stay strong in the faith, to giving some directions and things like that. He was transported to Rome under chains, and then he was thrown into the Colosseum. The Colosseum was often used for the gladiatorial games. So this is something that was very popular in the Roman culture. You have games of men fighting to the death for sport. And you also have a number of martyrdoms occur in the Colosseum in a number of ways. So often martyrs would be put into the games as gladiators and would refuse to fight. So they would be killed. Or martyrs would be thrown into the Colosseum before wild beasts, and they would be eaten. Ignatius faced death before those beasts in the Colosseum. Though he was eaten by lions, he will be resurrected one day. And he will receive a new body. Another who was persecuted was Polycarp. Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna, which is in modern-day Turkey. He was a very old man at the time. He was condemned also for refusing to sacrifice to the gods. I should note both Ignatius and Polycarp. Ignatius was martyred during Trajan's persecution, and Polycarp Ignatius under Domitian and Polycarp under Trajan. So, labeled an atheist and a bishop, a leader in the church, Trajan sought to make an example of him. He was encouraged by Roman authorities to save his life by denying Christ. They didn't want to kill him. He was old. They respected his age, and yet he would not blaspheme his king. When asked to deny Christ, he said, "I have served Christ for 86 years, and he has never did me any wrong. How can I blaspheme the king who saved me?" He was condemned to death and burned at the stake. And yet the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Two others I want to mention are two women, Blandina and Perpetua. We don't know a lot about Blandina because she was a slave, but we do know a lot about Perpetua. She was a noblewoman. And when you look at the lives of the martyrs, I think it's really interesting to contrast these two women. You have Blandina, who's a slave, who is illiterate, and yet who remained faithful in the midst of persecution and death. And you have Perpetua, who was fluent in both Greek and Latin, which was very rare in that day. Both women were young mothers. Both women were pregnant when condemned to death. Perpetua is remembered because she kept a diary during her imprisonment. You can read that diary, the Diary of Perpetua, and that's how we understand some of her position and ability. But Blandina was a slave woman arrested during the persecution of Leon, which took place in 177, a local persecution. She endured torture day and night and would not recant. She was with a group of other women, and she encouraged them to remain faithful in the midst of torture. She, though tortured and not recanting, was condemned to death and thrown before a bull in an arena. Perpetua from Carthage, was martyred during the persecution of Decius. She was pregnant at the time of her imprisonment, wrote the diary, which we have today, and before her death was able to give birth to her child. She was killed by being burned at the stake. When we look at the persecution of the early church, we can hear these stories. We can have compassion on the loss, but we can't quite understand what exactly they went through and experienced. And I think one way that we can get our minds around a little more is read Tertullian in his letter written to martyrs. He was a pastor, a faithful pastor who wrote to people in his congregation who were facing this martyrdom. He wrote this letter to the martyrs in around 197 AD. And it's addressed to those Christians who were imprisoned for their faith and who were awaiting martyrdom. His aim in the work is to help to sustain their faith by removing any fears that they might have. And further, he shows them that martyrdom is actually one of the most glorious of states and provides examples of those who have met with death bravely. So this letter is from a pastor to those who are about to face such death. So I'd like to read this together. I think it's helpful to get some insight into how a church leader would encourage his people in the midst of this. If you want to pull that out there, everyone have one? We're doing on time. All right. So he says this: Blessed martyrs designate. Along with the provision which Our Lady Mother the Church from her bountiful breasts, and each brother out of his private means makes for your bodily wants in the prison, accept also from me some contribution to your spiritual sustenance. For it is not good that the flesh be feasted and the spirit starve. Nay, if that which is weak be carefully looked to, it is but right that which is still weaker should not be neglected. Not that I am specially entitled to exhort you, yet not only the trainers and overseers, but even the unskilled, nay, all who choose without the slightest need for it, or want to animate from afar by their cries the most accomplished gladiators, and from the mere throng of onlookers useful suggestions have sometimes come. First then, O blessed, right? They're blessed in the midst of this. Grieve not the Holy Spirit, who has entered the prison with you. For if he had not gone with you there, you would not have been there this day. Do you give all endeavor, therefore, to retain him? Lead you thence to your Lord. The prison, indeed, is the devil's house as well, wherein he keeps his family. But you have come within its walls for the very purpose of trampling the wicked one underfoot in his chosen abode. You had already, in pinched battles outside, utterly overcome him. Let him have no reason to say to himself, they are now in my domain. With vile hatreds I shall tempt them, with defections or dissensions among themselves. Let him fly from your presence and sulk away into his own abyss, shrunken and torpid, as though he were an out-charmed or smoked-out snake. Give him not the success in his own kingdom of setting you at variance with each other, but let him find you armed and fortified with concord, for peace among you is battle with him. Some, not able to find peace in the church, have been used to seek it from the imprisoned martyrs. And so you ought to have it dwelling with you, to cherish it and to guard it, that you may be able, perhaps, to bestow it upon others. Other things, hindrances equally of the soul, may have accompanied you as far as the prison gate, to which also your relatives may have attended you. There and thenceforth you were severed from the world. How much more from the ordinary course of worldly life and all its affairs? Nor let the separation from the world alarm you. For if we reflect that the world is more really the prison, we shall see that you have gone out of a prison rather than into one. The world has greater darkness, blinding men's hearts. The world imposes the more grievous fetters, blinding men's souls. The world breathes out the worst impurities, human lusts. The world contains the larger number of criminals, even the whole human race. Then last of all, it awaits the judgment, not of the proconsul, but of God. Wherefore, O blessed, you may regard yourselves as having been translated from a prison to, we may say, a place of safety. It is full of darkness, but ye are full of light. It has bonds, but God has made you free. Unpleasant exhalations are there, but ye are an odor of sweetness. The judge is daily looked for, but ye shall judge the judges for themselves. Sadness may be there for him who sighs for the world's enjoyments. Christian, outside the prison, has renounced the world, but in prison he has renounced a prison too. It is of no consequence where you are in the world, you who are not of it. And if you have lost some of life's sweets, it is the way of business to suffer present loss, that after gains may be the larger. Thus far I say nothing of the rewards to which God invites the martyrs. Meanwhile, let us compare the life of the world and of the prison, and see if the spirit does not gain more in the prison than the flesh loses. Nay, by the care of the church and the love of the brethren, even the flesh does not lose there what is for its good, while the spirit obtains besides important advantages. So often in the early church, and in this period during Roman persecution, if you were imprisoned, the only way you would be fed is if people, your family, your friends came and fed you. And then, right, the Romans, you didn't get three hot meals, right? You had to be fed. And so, right there, he's saying, well, you're being provided for even now by the church. You have no occasion to look on strange gods. You do not run against their images. You have no part in heathen holidays, even by mere bodily mingling in them. You are not annoyed by the foul fumes of idolatrous solemnities. You are not pained by the noise of the public shows, nor by the atrocity or madness or immodesty of their celebrants. Your eyes do not fall on stews or brothels. You are free from causes of offense, from temptations, from unholy reminiscences. You are free now from persecution too. Right? So now that you're in prison, you're free from all these things in the world. Prison does the same service for the Christian which the desert did for the prophet. Our Lord himself spent much of his time in seclusion, that he might have greater liberty to pray, that he might be quit of the world. It was in a mountain solitude, too, where he showed his glory to the disciples. Let us drop the name of prison. Let us call it a place of retirement. Though the body is shut in, though the flesh is confined, all things are open to the Spirit. In the Spirit, then, roam abroad. In the Spirit, walk about, not setting before you shady paths or long colonnades, but the ways which lead to God. As often as in the Spirit your footsteps are there, so often you will not be in bonds. The leg does not feel the chain when the mind is in the heavens. The mind compasses the whole man about, and whither it wills, it carries him. Be where thy heart shall be, there shall be thy treasure. Be there our heart, then, where we would have our treasure. There's just so much here. let me just, we'll finish up with this last section here, or if you guys want to keep going. Grant now, O blessed, again, calls them blessed, that even to the Christians the prison is unpleasant, yet we were called to the warfare of the living God in our very response to the sacramental words. Well, no soldier comes out to the campaign laden with luxuries, nor does he go to the action from his comfortable chamber, but from the light and narrow tent, where every kind of hardness, roughness, and unpleasantness must be put up with. Even in peace, soldiers inure themselves to war by toils and inconveniences, marching in arms, running over the plain, working at the ditch, making the testudo, engaging in many arduous labors. The sweat of the brow is on everything. The bodies and the minds may not shrink at having to pass from shade to sunshine, from sunshine to icy cold, from the robe of peace to the coat of mail, from the robe of peace to the coat of mail, from silence to clamor, and from quiet to tumult. In like manner, O blessed ones, count whatever is hard in this lot of yours as a discipline of your powers of mind and body. You are about to pass through a noble struggle, in which the living God acts the part of superintendent, in which the Holy Ghost is your trainer, in which the prize is eternal crown of angelic essence, citizenship in the heavens, glory everlasting. Therefore, your Master, Jesus Christ, who has anointed you with his Spirit and led you forth to the arena, has seen it good, before the day of conflict, to take you from a condition more pleasant in itself, and your strength might be the greater. For athletes, too, are set to a more stringent discipline, that they may have their physical powers built up. They are kept pleasant drinks, they are pressed, racked, worn out. The harder their labors in the preparatory training, the stronger is the hope of victory. And they, says the apostle, that they may obtain a corruptible crown. We, with the crown eternal in our eye, look upon the prison as our training ground, that at the goal of final judgment we may be brought forth well disciplined by many a trial, since virtue is built up by hardships, as by voluptuous indulgence it is overthrown. So that's how Tertullian, right, encourages those in prison awaiting martyrdom. Right, giving them an eternal perspective, reminding them of the realities that they are not of this world, right? Rather, they are going home through martyrdom. I mean, that's just an encouragement reading it now. Can't imagine reading it in the dungeons, waiting martyrdom. So that's a picture of persecution in the early church. We'll take a brief break, and then we will finish up with early Christian worship. This is I have a lot here, so we'll see how far I get. Oh, those four? Yeah, definitely. I was going to mention Eusebius talks about these martyrs. This book is also really good in working through the early church. Henry Chadwick's kind of classic book on the early church goes through, talks about those martyrs, persecution, worship in the early church. He goes all the way to talking about Augustine and some different things up to the late antique period. Ignatius, Polycarp. So again, right, I've given you four. I could talk about Cyprian. I could talk about Tertullian was later martyred. Those are just two that just pop into my head that I didn't even mention. Andina. Another great book on, if you're interested in reading more about early Christian martyrdom, is Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Is there a particular version?
Of Fox's Book of Martyrs?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, there. Oh man, I will get back to you on that. Because there was a whole lecture that I had in seminary on that, so I can get that to you. Oh man, I don't know off the top of my head. I was like, I'm just saying. Yeah, yeah. Say one of these 3 or 4 publishers, and you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, place I always go to for church history stuff is Reformation Heritage. It's Reformation Heritage Press. They always have really good stuff. I like them a lot.
Are you a fan of Houghton or Houghton? How do you say his name?
I'm not familiar with. One thing I did want to mention too, when we read the works of writers like Tertullian, I think it's so stark to see the contrast with how often and how easily swayed we are today by flattery, by like, oh, everything's going to be okay. I just find that Tertullian, this letter is just always so bracing. Like, right, as Christians, we can embrace the hardest parts of life, right, and the darkest parts of life. I mean, seeing things rightly, but understanding that, right, in Christ all is gain.